Let me welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. I'm so glad to see and hopefully to hear from all of you today. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the forum's founder, host, and chief cat herder. And for the next hour, we're going to be discussing the future of education. Now, before we do that, let me just walk you through the forum. Let me explain to you where it comes from, how it's supported, how the technology works, and what it's all about. So to begin with, you should know that the forum is a spin-off from a non-discussion-based project. That's the Future Trends of Technology and Education report. Now, if you haven't seen that, FTTE is a monthly trends analysis that looks at the major trends reshaping education and technology. They range from economics to demographics to digital technology and enrollment. They track about almost 90 trends. And if you'd like to get a sample of it and maybe subscribe, just go to ftte.us. Now, the FTTE report is a report. It's a one-way publication. What we do here on the forum is quite the opposite. What we do in the next hour is entirely based on discussion. We are all about hearing your thoughts, treating your questions, and engaging in conversation so that we can collectively explore the future of higher education. Now, the forum and the FTTE report are both part of a broader project called the Future of Education Observatory. Now, this is a multimedia, participatory, ongoing attempt to grapple with the future of education. So it includes the FTTE report, it includes this forum, but it also includes a blog, and includes a book club, it even has a bookstore, and more things coming up. So if you're curious about that, just go to futureofeducation.us and you can find out more. Now, we can only do this kind of work with the help of some very generous supporters. And before we proceed, I'd like to thank them. So first of all, I'd like to thank NYSERNet from New York State. This is a nonprofit that helps that state's colleges and universities not only get online with broadband connections, but also do great work together with digital technology, digital networks. We thank them for their generous support. We're also grateful to Shindig, because you can tell Shindig makes available this technology we're using right now. So let me just walk you through the technology so you can get a sense of how it works. If you haven't been here for a while or if you're a first timer, let me explain. So first of all, where I am right now and where this slide is just for a minute is called the stage. It's called that because everybody involved in this video conference can see and hear everything on the stage, just like a stage in an auditorium. And in fact, as we bring a guest up on stage and as we bring more participants on stage, then you'll all be able to hear what they say and you'll be able to watch them as well. Now, right below us, if you look across the screen, you should see maybe a dozen, maybe 20 or so individual icons. And some of them are video feeds. So you can see, for example, Tracy Stuns, who's now wondering why I'm talking to her directly. You could see the photo of Jedediah Rex or the silhouette of Tavish Bell. Each of those represents usually one person, sometimes several people clustered around one machine. And each of those is a participant, or a participant node in this conversation. In fact, if you want to get to know more about one of those people, or if you'd like to have a chat with them, simply double click on their little icon. And if they want to talk with you, your two icons will click together like Legos. You can have your own private audiovisual bubble, which is pretty handy. Now, below that swarm of participation, you should see a white strip running along the screen. And that has several key buttons that are the main ways that you can participate with us all. So let me just walk you through that. On the leftmost edge of that white strip, you'll see a button that has a number. Right now it's 66. That's the number of participants involved. And above that are a few human heads. If you click that, up will pop two different windows. Now, the window on the left will give you a kind of film strip view of everybody who's here, so you can mouse over them and learn a bit more about their title or their institutional affiliation. On the right is a classic chat box. So a simple chat box where you can type in questions and comments. So right now I can see Heidi Cates, Karen Burns, Tavish Bell, Mark Corbett-Wilson, and Ashley Tharp introducing themselves. The chat boxes are good for introducing yourself and for sharing thoughts, oftentimes sharing links or other resources. It's a good way to kind of informally raise questions. One key thing to remember, though, is that chat boxes are limited to groups of 20 people or so. So that's the 20 or so people that have come in with you and as you log in. So not everybody can see your chat box, just that one particular group. So it's a pretty handy tool in many ways. Now, next to that chat box button on the white toolbar is another button that's a question mark with a circle around it. If you click that, you can type into the resulting box a question or a comment that you want us to share with the audience. So if you do that, when the time is right, I'll flash it on the screen so everyone can see it, and then I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it. And that's a good thing to do if you have a quick question or if your camera or microphone aren't working or you're not in a broadband connection. Now, if your camera or microphone are working, you are in a decent connection, and you're in a place where you can talk out loud, then click that raised hand button. That tells us that you'd like to join us up here on stage. And the minute the time is right, we'll beam you up on stage. So instead of this slide, it'll be your smiling face and your ability to ask questions of myself and, more importantly, of the forum's guest this week. And that's really easy to do. And we may have even easier ways to set it up today. So those are the three main ways within Shindig to participate. You can just, and please, as the hour goes, whichever feels most comfortable for you, click on them. We'd love to hear you. This is all about that. If that's not enough, you can open a new tab and go to Twitter and use the hashtag FTTE, which is the hashtag we'll be monitoring throughout for people's questions and comments. And already we have jokes about Coventry and notes from Vanessa Vale and Robin DeRosa. So all of this technology is made available by Shindig, and we're really grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to our supporters on Patreon. If you haven't seen Patreon, it's a crowdfunding site like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, and it's a platform where you can support someone making creative stuff. In that case, it's our projects of making creative stuff about the future of education. And you can see here from this slide that we have some awesome people who have been contributing every month to make sure that the lights stay on here at the Future Trends Forum. So people like Matthew P. Henry, Kristen Eshelman, Chris Lott, Urban DeVries, Jeannie Kim Han, Michael Haggins, Patrick Favorty, William O'Shea, Michael Slade. We're really grateful to them for all of their support. And we hope you can join them. Just go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander and learn more. Now, that is who supports all of this. That is how the technology works. That's the purpose of the forum and where it came from. What I'd like to do now is get rid of the slides and actually talk with this week's guest. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Sean Michael Morris. He's currently the Director of Digital Learning at the wonderful University of Mary Washington. He has done wonderful work on technology and pedagogy in a variety of ways. He's been an early adopter and a pioneer of distance collaboration and co-working online. He's very, very keen and passionate about integrating social justice, student-centered pedagogy, and pedagogy with technology. He's written a great deal about this and worked a great deal about this, and he's coming to us not from the University of Mary Washington in Virginia in the United States, but from the fabled town of Coventry in the United Kingdom. So we're really grateful to him for being able to make a transatlantic crossing just for our meeting, and we're welcoming him right now to our program. So let me make sure that all the systems are working. Let me beam him up on stage. And as this happens, imagine a dramatic drum roll as we anticipate, will it work? Will we see the fabled Sean Michael Morris? Hello, Sean.
Hey, Brian. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. I hope your friend didn't get you involved with the British police force as you sped down M5.
No. It actually worked out just fine.
Excellent.
We were sort of in competition with the GPS's calculation of when we would arrive, which was really fun.
Oh, wow. Well, catch your breath, and once again, welcome. What brings you to Coventry today?
So actually, my friend Naomi De La Tour works at University of Warwick, where Jesse Stummel and I actually a couple of years ago we were international fellows there, and I've continued to do some work with the folks here at Warwick, and also with some folks at the Open University, which is in Milton. I actually came over to be on vacation, but as soon as people found out I was going to be here, they say, "Hey, you want to do this? Hey, you want to do this?" So I've done a couple of workshops and done some teaching, and it's been a blast. I've had a really good time.
Well, I'm really glad to hear it. I hope you get some vacation time in. And on behalf of some of the longtime participants in the forum, please check out Milton Keynes. We have a lot of fans of the Open University here.
Yeah, they have some really great stuff going on up there.
Indeed, indeed. So, listen, I introduced you with just a brief title card and just a very, very brief spasm of biography. Um, for you to say more about yourself, as you introduce yourself a little bit further, can you just tell us for the next year, for the next 11 months or so, what are you going to be working on? What are the major challenges, and what's going to be taking up most of your time and most of your brain?
So the primary project that I work on actually is Digital Pedagogy Lab, which is a 5-day professional development event that takes place at the University of Mary Washington every year. This is an event that Jesse Stommel and I started in 2015, conceived of in 2012. And it's really a very different kind of event, and different from a sort of regular conference. It's done in cohorts, in tracks, not unlike DHSI, but with a kind of with a real community emphasis in terms of meeting each other, networking, finding space for reflection and contemplation and writing and creative collaboration. So it's really much more of we like to think of it as sort of a digital pedagogy summer camp. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. And one of the things about DPL is that it's I sort of think of it as the pedagogy of the event itself is it's in its hospitality. So there's a lot of really reaching out to people, really trying to be receptive to what their needs might be, trying to create a really lovely, comfortable, safe environment for whoever might come. And we do have people coming from all over the world to be there for those 5 days.
Pedagogy is hospitality. Hospitality is pedagogy. That's a really, really provocative phrase. Oh.
Well, there's so much about learning that takes place in environments where you feel comfortable, and where you feel like your needs are met. And so, for example, one of the things that I spend a lot of time on, and this is very strange because I think of myself as a pedagogue and not as an event planner, but I spend a lot of time on catering and figuring out everyone's dietary needs and making sure that everyone has exactly what they need and that we have coffee throughout the day, and because all of those things are necessary for a good learning process. So it's sort of like setting up your classroom in a very specific way so that certain kinds of things can be accomplished.
Indeed. And food has a special role in classrooms. Over in the chat box, Rita Marie Conrad says, "I've been to DPL once and it's fantastic!" Exclamation.
Yay! That's awesome.
So you have fans, of course. But that's 1 week of the calendar year. When you're not busy conducting that or setting it up, what else are you doing at the great University of Mary Washington?
I really wish it was just 1 week, Brian. I'll answer your question in just a second, but we have a very small team who runs it, so it actually does take up a lot of my time. In addition, DPL runs another event every year, usually in an international location. So this year we're running a one in Toronto. So I've been working on both of those at the same time. But other than DPL, a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the work that I do at University of Mary Washington is really trying to help faculty understand different ways of approaching online learning, new ways of approaching online learning. University of Mary Washington is kind of working on bridging out into doing more fully online learning, especially for non-traditional audiences, non-traditional students, for continuing education purposes and that sort of thing. And so we've been doing a lot of work around what does that mean? Who are these? How do you teach to people who you're never going to meet? These are new sorts of things for some of the faculty at UMW. I approach these conversations from a perspective of what I call critical instructional design, which is an approach to instructional design that considers critical pedagogy and helping students sort of come to grips with their agency and become readers of their world, and really thinking about, as you said in the intro, some student-centered learning, which is a very different sort of approach than most online learning takes, which is content-driven and about replicability, rather than really helping students learn who they are.
Very broadcast-oriented.
Yeah.
Friends, I'm going to have all kinds of questions for Sean, but the point of the forum is for you to put forward your questions and your comments. So be they about the Digital Pedagogy Lab, be they about the fact that, once again, we have a guest with a very fine beard, or if it's about taking the transition of faculty from teaching face-to-face to teaching wholly online, or critical pedagogy is. This is the time for your questions and comments. So again, you can use the chat box, or you can use the raised hand to join us up here on stage. And in fact, I'm going to just quickly add a little square here on stage. So if you see this, there should be a kind of teal-colored box. And if you just click that, and there's a join podium button, you'll be able to pop yourself up here on stage. We can hold it to 4 people at once. So you think about this as a kind of pop-up panel happening simultaneously.
Yay.
Oh, and here comes Tom Riley. Let's see if Tom's connection is live. Hello, Tom. Can you see and hear us?
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Yes.
You are here. Hello, Tom.
Global warming stuff. The IPCC Special Report 1.5 seems to be driving, saying that this is going to be it. Forget Mars. Forget everything else. We're going to work global warming for the rest of the century. Do you see any movement or change or anything responding to that IPCC
report
1.5 or the American version, which is called version 4?
With regards to digital pedagogy or teaching in higher education?
In your field, is anybody paying any attention to it at all?
I hope so. It's actually very interesting. That's a really interesting question, because within the field of education and when you sort of are head down and teaching and doing the semester to semester thing and dealing with submitting reports and doing research and all of the other things, what's happening with the environment can seem like something that's irrelevant, or that's outside your sort of circle. But actually, when we look at critical pedagogy and the idea of helping students read their world, it's actually incredibly important for us to be addressing what's really going on in the world. So even if you're teaching, you're teaching a literature class, certainly if you're teaching science, but if you're teaching a literature class, you're teaching sociology or any of those sorts of things, helping students understand how to really look at what's happening in the world, and not masking it behind the so-called ivory tower or the kind of bubble that can happen at a college or university, I think is incredibly important. Now, what you do with that, or what you enable students to do with that, or what they decide to enable themselves to do with that, is kind of up to them. But I think it's a really good point, because I think we do tend to get kind of nose to the grindstone about things, and we don't really pay attention to what's happening out in the world. But this generation, especially the young college students that are entering school and getting through their bachelor's degrees now, that is their future. They're very concerned about what's happening, and I think that opening up those dialogues in conversation and remembering that that's going on with students is incredibly important. No matter what, it's. I mean, there's the whole. My dog ate my homework. Well, my world is ending, so maybe I couldn't quite get to the paper today. These are really honest anxieties, and I think that being in touch with where students are with those anxieties is incredibly important.
I am a STEM coach, so I work with mostly high school level, and that IPCC paper sets up the situation where now you don't tell them to go design the latest computer game. You go, here's 100 things you can do about global warming. You damn well better choose one of them, because you ain't going to be working if you don't.
Yes.
That's just an enormous change. I think it is justified off that report. It's that damn scary.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I'm really glad you mentioned that. Again, reading the world is a key pedagogy. Before I could say anything more, questions are beginning to flood in. So let me bring up right now a question from Nate Angel, who's with Hypothesis. And they'd ask, is competency-based learning a worthy pedagogical frame, despite its common current mechanistic deployment?
Good question. That's a good question. I generally, so to start with, critical pedagogy is started really as an approach towards social change, and has been applied in education. And the reason I'm saying that is because its approach is very, very, very broad. I tend to generally be suspicious of anything that's approach is narrow and that's about that is specifically aimed at let's graduate more students, or let's make sure that they know what we want them to know. I think it's actually really, really important for us to keep a focus on what students grow into their, what knowledge grows from their own exploration. I think that's incredibly important. So competency-based, while it tends to be a kind of more personalized or individualized approach, still relies on someone saying, this is what you need to know. And it still tends to be content oriented as far as I can tell. But that said, I actually think that just about any pedagogical approach is important to be looking at, and it always provides for good conversations if we can take a critical look at it. Doesn't mean that competency-based education is wrong. It gives us a new forum for talking about pedagogy.
And your position right now in working with the faculty and the staff of UMW is doing that, trying to broaden their understanding of pedagogy and what's possible.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes all kinds of sense. Great question, Nate. Thank you. I'd like to bring up on stage the awesome Kisa Johnson, long-standing friend of the program. Kisa, where are you today?
I am in Ann Arbor at University of Michigan.
All right.
Oh, I love Ann Arbor.
Oh, me too. It's amazing.
It's great there. How's your weather? Is your weather all right?
It's cold. It's very cold.
It's cold.
Yes.
Very cold in Michigan.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten that much snow, but the temperature is it's a bit much.
Yeah. And the wind.
Yeah. So my question was, what type of ethical framework do you utilize when you're approaching and you're practicing critical pedagogy? And what type of things do you like? What was the second part? It was more personal. Like, how do you find yourself being hung up when you're practicing critical pedagogy yourself?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, when you think it critically, I'm like, you gotta have some type of ethical framework to like where you stand and who you are as a person. And so when you're practicing in these spaces, you always are getting constantly challenged. So could you share something?
Sure. So, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question or not, so tell me if it doesn't. But I suppose if it's an ethical approach, it would be based in sort of persistent inquiry. And the point of that being the critical pedagogy is sort of its whole essence or its ethos is all around exposing systems of oppression. And helping students see, or anybody see really, what systems of oppression are around them, and the systems of oppression that we just sort of accepted as day-to-day life, and that we also don't believe we have any power to change. So my sort of, I guess, if an ethical approach is to constantly be asking questions after the systems that we assume are just there and that need to stay the same. So what I do is with students, with teachers, with everybody I work with, is to encourage them to be always asking again. For example, when people, one of the examples actually that was interesting recently was someone was talking about how, well, I do a really cool student-centered thing, and this actually is a cool student-centered thing, and that is that I get students to help design rubrics for their own assignments. That sounds really cool. But when you really get it, then when you start asking those questions, you start saying, okay, but what about rubrics? So aren't you just asking students to participate in a system that you're assuming is correct? And so shouldn't we be asking the question about rubrics rather than saying, okay, imagine the rubrics are an oppressive system and you get students to then participate in that oppressive system. That's actually not freeing them or liberating them at all. So asking the questions after rubrics is actually a really important piece of that. So in that way, sort of the ethic or the approach is one of sort of constant inquiry. On a personal level, that can lead to a lot of trouble. And sort of constantly asking questions can be annoying to your family and your friends and your colleagues. And so it has to be done in a certain kind of spirit. And there have to be times when you have to back off from it and you realize, you don't have to ask questions of every movie you watch and every TV show you watch. But from a teaching perspective, I really do try to encourage that. Now, alongside of that, though, is a level of compassion and generosity, because that work also requires, on the other side of it, a certain amount of self-care. Because as you start to ask those sorts of questions over and over and over again, you end up kind of coming up against hard truths, and sometimes hard truths about the things that you yourself believe in. I had someone the other day, yesterday when I was talking to a group of teachers at the Open University, I forget the phrase she said, but essentially the idea of unlearning something that you've learned can actually be very difficult, emotionally difficult, affectively difficult. And so trying to find ways of making that a little bit softer, making sure you're being kind to yourself, making sure you're being kind to students who are struggling with those things as well. My colleague, Jesse Stommel, talks a lot about ungrading or not grading. And one of the examples that comes up there is students actually really enjoy or actually rely on getting grades and getting that kind of feedback or that sort of instantaneous feedback about their performance. And so bringing them into an environment where you're not going to be grading them is actually a matter of taking care of them in that process and making sure they understand that they can trust you. You're not out to catch them, that this is actually going to be a good generative process for them, as opposed to something where they just are set loose and they have no anchor at all. So I think those are some considerations. Does that kind of get at the answer to your question?
Yeah. Actually, to be honest, I really like more of the how you said you're approaching it, from a compassionate perspective for yourself. To me, or having some sort of kindness and understanding. To me, those are more ethical approaches than the inquiry. I think that that's an approach, or approach how we approach it, but I'm more so into the love ethics, which you kind of shared, which Bell Hooks talks about a lot of
yes.
How do we look at ourselves? And so if we're not looking at ourselves from a compassionate standpoint and being kind, understanding, then how are we really supposed to do that for other people? That's quite interesting. I got one more question and then I'll get off because I know you have a sleep of them. So how do you see critical pedagogy being supported and actually being practiced when we're looking at the system of education, which itself is a wicked problem? And you have a lot of third space workers in this environment now that, education wasn't set up for instructional designers or learning experience designers, UX designers in that space, or even programmers. And we help support a lot of the technology that the instructors use. Also building innovation centers that they use and they come to. How do you, what's your thoughts on how do third space workers kind of operate utilizing a critical pedagogy?
Good question.
That's a really good question. It's pretty difficult and I've been an instructional designer and sort of that they and it is hard. I think that critical pedagogy for me has always been a kind of grassroots movement or grassroots approach to things rather than a top-down kind of thing. So even in a space where an instructional designer is speaking with an instructor and they're working with a teacher or they're working with a program director or whomever they may be working with, the opportunities are in the conversation. The opportunities are in the dialogue with those people. And sometimes, as an instructional designer, part of my work at the at Middlebury College, actually, before I came to UNW, was to create really sincere, focused spaces for dialogue with faculty as much as possible. And sometimes that was literally starting a conversation with, how's the weather where you are? I mean, because honestly, that moment of like connecting as a human, as opposed to let's just connect as professionals and let's get this job done, is also reflective of the kind of pedagogy that you want to see in online classes. You want to see more personable approach. You want to see a more human approach. And so if you can begin to approach faculty that way and convince them that they can do the same in their online classes, I think that's one way to begin. But I think that is the sort of grassroots. One of the things that I talk about, and I'm sorry, I just keep going on, but one of the things that I talk about is this idea of a habitus that we occupy, a pedagogical habitus that we occupy, and that's sort of all of the mannerisms, all of the behaviors that go into your pedagogy, and those you take that into every situation that you're in. So you take that into a classroom, you take that into an online classroom or a discussion forum, you take that into this space right here, you take that into spaces with faculty, into committee meetings, into hallways, into accidental interactions. It's basically you just wear your pedagogy at all times. And in that way, pedagogy is much, much broader than how you teach. It's really how you relate. Than anything else. But core to that is, of course, this idea of leading, right? Pedagogy means to lead children. But the idea of leading, that in that moment you're offering an example of a kind of behavior or a kind of approach, and helping people understand, like, this is one way to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it
Sure.
so much.
Thanks, Ryan. Questions, Kisa. Oh, wonderful to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Stay warm.
Yes, indeed. Love the idea of teaching as habitus. That's a fantastic idea. Friends, you can see how easy it is for people to join us up here on stage. So we've already had Tom and we've had Kisa. Just raise your hand if you want to come up on stage. We also have a couple more text questions, and I want to bring these up. So we have one from Gretchen. Let me bring this up on the screen. It's from Gretchen Withun at Ithaca, who asks, what free resources can you point out for someone just beginning their instructional design studies, specifically using the critical approach?
So yeah, one of the best free resources, honestly, is Twitter, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. If you follow the hashtag DigPed, DIGPED, a lot of discussion goes on there about instructional design, about open learning, open educational resources, all that sort of thing takes place on that hashtag. So it's a really great resource for folks. Another free resource is the book that me and my colleague Jesse just released. We actually have that. There's a link on underneath all of these faces that are up here. There's a link to An Urgency of Teachers, yes, which is the book that we just released, and there is a free version online. So you can read it online for free if that's what you're looking for. It's also, of course, something that could be used in classes or with groups of teachers if you'd like to. And that covers a lot of talking about critical pedagogy, critical digital pedagogy, critical instructional design. All of the sorts of things that I'm talking about here are in that book as well. And that's a really good free resource. But a lot of the folks actually who are hovering around in this shindig meeting are also resources. I'm particularly looking, because of who's on my screen right now, I'm particularly looking at Robin DeRosa, because Robin DeRosa has been an amazing person to be associated with, and does just incredible work. There's a lot of those folks, again, available through the hashtag, the DigPed hashtag, and through Twitter. And these are all really wonderful people. And I hope, Robin, that you don't suddenly get 1,000 emails from everybody everywhere. But yeah, look to the people who are in this community, because that's been an incredible, valuable resource for me.
So in many ways, digital pedagogy is like Soylent Green made out of people.
It's made out of people, but not in a really, really gross way.
It's a nourishing way. Gretchen, this is
all your vitamins are right here.
That's right. That's a fantastic question, Gretchen. And Sean, what a terrific answer. I hope everyone has had a chance to check out some of these resources, both personal and textual. I should just add that Jesse Stommel was a guest on the forum a few weeks ago. We have a recording of that on YouTube. And Robin DeRosa will be a guest coming up. And we'll have that recording as well, so you can all join us. I think the forum is becoming an area of a great deal of resources for people to draw upon. And thank you again, Gretchen, for emphasizing open and free resources. Speaking of openness and speaking of freedom, we have a great question here from A. Charles. And this is one of those simple questions that can blow everything open. How do you define social justice? And in your opinion, what's the best pedagogical approach to achieve it?
Well, recently social justice has become kind of a fraught term. And for a variety of reasons that I won't necessarily go into here, but I think of social justice as basically, well, from a critical pedagogical standpoint, it's really about liberation. It's about people being able to not only recognize their agency, but figure out ways to utilize their agency to change or influence oppressive structures that they're influenced by. The best sort of, but the best sort of pedagogical approach that I would sort of off the top of my head think is, and I was actually just again talking with some students at the University of Warwick 2 days ago about this a little bit, and I think that the best pedagogical approach is really to listen. And to listen not with the intention of answering, like you're waiting to respond, kind of listening, but actually just listening. One of the really important pieces of what I consider to be a social justice movement is people telling stories and being allowed to tell their stories. There's so many voices that have not helped narrate the history that we know of, or that has been widely published, I should say. And I think that it's time that we start listening to those stories and understanding where those stories are coming from and how those stories have in fact informed the culture that we participate in, and the ways in which those voices and those stories have been repressed or oppressed or erased. I think those are all really important things that we need to be doing. I was at the University of Colorado at Denver several months back, and I was asked by someone in the STEM field, well, I'm in the sciences and I don't really see how oppression plays a role in that. And my response was, well, how many women do you teach? Like, I mean, not in your classroom, but also how many women scientists do you bring into your teaching? Because that right there immediately, are you erasing certain voices in science because your standard scientist is a cis straight white male, and so who are you bringing into this, and start thinking about those things, but more than that, to be able to invite people into a classroom or invite people into a circle of storytelling whose voices may not have been heard before. So that piece of listening, I think, is incredibly important.
Well, it's a fantastic answer, and actually a very elegant answer. Getting a lot of ideas very clearly for the giant conversational opening that A. Charles left you. Thank you, A. Charles, and thank you, Sean. I think right there you just gave us a way of thinking about where critical pedagogy can go. We have another question. So again, if you're new to the forum, you can see how easy it is to put questions up here. We're pretty friendly, I think. We have another text question here from our friends at Grinnell College, who ask, how do we use critical pedagogy for productive, generative, solution-based education? My exposure to critical pedagogy so far has been about pointing out how everything is flawed without solutions.
Oh, that's great. I love that, because actually it's totally true. Critical pedagogy often is accused of this, that it is not solution oriented at all, that it is everything's broken and here's how it's broken. And then go see if you can get dinner somewhere. And and that can be really problematic. Now, one of the things that I'm going to there's another author I want to bring into this, and her name is Maxine Green, and she's done a lot of work in imagination. So she has a basis in critical pedagogy. She was sort of a pupil of Freire's, but she did a lot of work in the arts. And so her focus on imagination was actually about productive generative solutions, finding ways to actually solve problems. One of the things that I've always had a problem with Freire's work is that it's this sort of three-part thing where you learn to read your world, you recognize that you have agency, and then you make change. But there's this gap in between your agency and making change. And to me, Maxine Green fills that gap with the imagination, the sort of idea of imagining things as if they can be otherwise. And when you can sort of see what future you want, what kind of change you want, that's how you begin to make that change. Now, one of the things about critical pedagogy is that there are no set answers, right? So everything is really contextual, both to the person, the problem, the environment, the culture, the time. And so being able to say, well, there's a best practice for critical pedagogy, there's not. You have to be able to apply the approach, the habitus of critical pedagogy, and then come up with imaginative solutions for what the problems may be. Different people are going to come up with different solutions. And sometimes you can use like a consensus model to create, group solutions or what have you. But it keeps us moving forward, and that's really part of the point. So instead of arriving at okay, we're done, because the thing is that okay, we're done means that we've now created a new state of things, which can then be analyzed in a new way, which someone who has agency will want to change, and we just keep moving forward in this way. So it's really very evolutionary. It's kind of an evolutionary philosophy in that way. Yeah, I think that doesn't actually give you a solution, but that's my answer for solutions, I guess. And feel free to ask me another question if that was not enough.
Yeah, that's a very democratic lowercase d approach. And hey, Charles, I know you can't do video right now, but if you do want to follow up, just fire off another text. We'd be glad to continue on with that. Thank you. But we do have one on video right now. Let me just bring up Jonathan Parts. Hang on. So this is great. You have to imagine me throwing all kinds of switches. What I need is an ego. And this is speaking of Sean, you just mentioned being at University of California, Denver, or University of Colorado, Denver.
Colorado, Denver, yeah.
Jonathan at Pueblo. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey. I was the bad person who asked you that stupid question from the point of view of the STEM fields in Denver. I was visiting CU Denver, and I asked very similar to that. So,
it wasn't a stupid question at all. It was a great question.
I just want to go a little further. I've been reading your book, the free version of your book online quite a bit lately. There's a whole lot of activity around your book. I don't know, Brian, if people are annotating it, and there are Twitter and discussion feeds going like crazy. It's quite exciting.
It's great.
I think another thing I said when we were in Denver was I like the critical pedagogy idea, and if you were to say to me that the history of inequality and oppression and so on is so bad in the that is hanging behind us into our past, that we have to give up on doing pure mathematics. I'm a mathematician, not a physical scientist, and just pick up on doing mathematics and concentrate only on teaching people how to be better citizens and multicultural awareness and so on. I would be sad, but I would agree with that. But my question is, are you really saying that critical pedagogy sort of is equal to the attitude we should have towards all of education today, or is it a subset of the attitude we should have towards? It seems to me there's a distinct. I don't know if I'm being one of those blind, stupid, cis white men about that I assume that I'm trying to make a distinction because it preserves my privilege. But it seems to me there's a distinction between talking about beautiful facts about prime numbers, which is something I love to do, and noticing that there are very few women and people of color in history and other nations that were permitted access to the tools and the environment and the support to to make new statements about prime numbers. And if there's a distinction, then is there any room for doing both the justice work and the pretty facts about prime, or about 12-tone music, or about listening poetry, or whatever other field you like, which is not directly associated with justice? Or are those two things in your mind kind of, we have to concentrate? We may not teach the prime number theorem until we have fixed the wrongs in the world. I would, if you say yes, I'll do it.
Okay. Well, first of all, to be really like obvious about this, I am also a cis white male, so that we share that sort of that piece of culture. Please don't stop teaching pure mathematics. When you explained pure mathematics to me, I thought it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. So I think that absolutely needs to continue. It's a beautiful human endeavor, and I think that to me is actually what we try to get to in education anyway. Is beautiful human endeavors. So definitely don't stop doing that. For me, I think this is one of the reasons why I started to fall back on this idea of habitus. Not all of us are social change agents. Not all of us are going to go out there and actually make things different in the world, and that's okay. Some of us aren't built for that, but this habitus of critical pedagogy enables us to start to see through systems of oppression, however big they are, however small they might be. So, for example, in a class about pure mathematics, you may decide to grade differently. You may look at rubrics. You may look at things that are pieces of the education system that oppress students or that make learning less beautiful, and decide to shift those around. That can be critical pedagogy. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and right the wrongs of all the white people in the world. That should be that should be all of our work at some level. But I think that if you can make learning more beautiful in some way, if you can start freeing students in some way, I think in our conversation, I talked about finding ways to invite more women, more people of color into your classrooms, making them more available to that. Because I know that there's a predominance of men in mathematics, for example. And so finding ways to do that. And that can be other work that you're doing at school in a variety of circumstances. But in your classroom, looking at, okay, so what systems of oppression or potential oppression do I participate in, and how can I shift those around and change those in my classroom while I'm teaching pure mathematics?
So can I follow up on that a little bit? So it seems like another thing we have to deal with, particularly in the kind of, so you do the digital pedagogy lab, particularly in the digital space, is that the kind of techie end of this seems to be a locus of some particularly ugly kind of, Twitter is a nightmare if you're a woman of color, all those kinds of, all that things that we are aware if we're not, pulling the wool over our own eyes. And, how do you think that we can, it seems like the techies have something to contribute. The digital pedagogy wouldn't exist without the digital, which is on the internet, which was created by a lot of technological insight. So we have to work with these people. I'm actually one of them. How do we persuade our colleagues who want to have a very, I have many of my colleagues in the sciences will say, I don't see race, right? I just don't see it, which is kind of nonsense. But they all I care about is how good a chemist you are. It's like, no, you.
We just had an audio blip. Jonathan, yes, are you still there? Okay, I think we're having an odd connection issue. Jonathan,
Yeah.
we just lost you. You were saying some of your colleagues only care, for example, about how good a chemist is, and then your audio froze.
Right. So I just want, if you could give advice, Sean, about how do you so not just within my own classroom, and I'm learning from your book and read, and the community, as you said, it's made of people. There's a lot to learn about how to do my practice better. How can we be better advocates with our colleagues in a corner. The digital corner is a particularly ugly corner for this kind of equity and critical thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that I think we can do, specific things that we can do. One is to expose your colleagues to Audrey Waters, because Audrey is an incredible critic of all things edtech. And her critique comes from a place of compassion and care, because she wants technology to be better, and she wants technologists to do better work. And so her critique is very much about that. And I think exposing people to Audrey is one way to start getting those dialogues going. And there again, I'm gonna say the same thing I said before, is that critical pedagogy and this work is very much a grassroots thing. So taking it into every conversation with people, as if they say, for example, well, I don't see color, catch them on that, stop them on that, and say, well, actually, here's the thing, and really have that conversation in that moment. And that's awkward and it's painful, and you will make enemies, and people will be like, I don't want to invite him to drinks anymore. But having those conversations is actually incredibly important. Too much damage has been done by not having those conversations, that we really need to start undoing that damage as much as possible, I think. So I think those small grassroots ways of reaching out to each other, of insisting that we have those conversations wherever we can, is very, very important.
Thank you.
Great question, Jonathan. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate
it. It's good to see you again.
It is. I'm glad to hear it. And we have actually one comment that jumps in on this from Nate Angel, who had a question about the number of change agents. And let me just put this on the screen. So are all of us social change agents? I would think if I didn't think of myself as a social change agent, I'd be ignoring the ways in which pretending not to be an agent is a form of agency.
That's incredibly clever. Thank you.
Well, Nate, incredibly clever.
That was a really lovely play back and forth with the words. You caught me. Yes, we are all social change agents, but we are at whatever level we can be. If you're raising children, for example, being a social change agent may be raising them with a certain kind of social awareness, and open-mindedness, telling them new narratives, giving them books that come from written by authors of color, for example, exposing them to things that they wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. That can be social change. Or talking to your students can be social change. Talking to your students about grades, really just talking about rubrics, talking about the mechanism of education, that can be part of it. Exposing people to Audrey Waters can be something a social change agent does. But it can be that sort of level at which you are, you're able to do it. This current generation, and I'm just going to bring this up because this is one of my sort of operative pieces. The current generation has been brought up with this sort of very big burden on their shoulders to essentially save the planet from everything that's been done to it. And many of them feel a great deal of anxiety from that. Anxiety that we don't see in online courses, anxiety that we rarely see in their classrooms, anxiety that is then, of course, compounded by the fact that so many college students now are food insecure, housing insecure, all of that sort of thing that comes into the classroom. They have a great deal of this sort of responsibility that's laid on their shoulders, and they feel it all the time. And I think that we have to be careful about saying that we're responsible for everything, because it's not. It simply isn't possible. It'd be like I was told at one point, the worst thing you can do with an accident on the side of the road is to stop if you're not a medical professional and you can't actually help, because you're just going to crowd everything up. Even if you want to help, because you really, really want to help, you're going to make a mess. You're going to make it worse. But where you can help, help. Everywhere you can help, help. And if you can't, recognize that someone will. But that doesn't mean you're shirking responsibility. It's just saying, this is what I'm capable of doing, and I'm going to do that thing that I'm capable of doing, and being really honest about that. So that may not be a very popular stance, but I feel like it's one that you can actually, that's sustainable, and that work sustaining this work is so important. This is long work. It's not going to get done overnight, and so we have to figure out ways to sustain it.
I want to circle
that
back.
makes sense.
That's a fantastic answer. And I want to circle back to the question of sustainability in just a second. But we had a quick clarifying question from Gordon Dalby, who says, when you're speaking about talking to them, is them students or peer educators?
Is there a difference?
Oh,
There again, pedagogy is about leading, and it's about serving as a model. So we're serving as a model to peers. We're serving as a model to students. We're serving as a model to our children. We're serving as a model to the community. And so we're never not teaching in that way, even with our peers.
Right. Well said. Well said. And we had a question up here from, let's see, this is from Lisa Stepanovic, who asks, how have you encouraged faculty to focus on deep learning rather than the spray and pray approach to teaching?
I've never heard the spray and pray approach. That makes me laugh so hard. That's horrible. Don't spray on your students in any way, shape, or form. That's actually really difficult because there's a way in which education, the way that it's set up, especially around the idea of a kind of production of graduated students, there's a way in which we're encouraged to rush, to make it fast, and then just hope that something sticks, right? And so, to me, there needs to be, teachers are in this interesting space of really having to be part of the resistance, if you will. And I don't mean like the resistance against, whatever, the alien invasion, but resistance in terms of we're that middle space between the institution and students. And it's our job to kind of be custodians in a way of both. And so, but that means sometimes serving the institution and sometimes serving the student. And I think that deep learning serves the students. And so having to slow down, figuring out ways to slow down, even really being incredibly clever and really savvy about the way that you write your syllabus so that the institution's happy and you have room to give time to students. It's a matter of being clever in a lot of cases to actually make it work. But honestly, one of the biggest things that I tell faculty is, if you care about students, like if you're in this because you care about students, like honor that and have that be the biggest factor for you, that's what you're in this for. And then you'll find ways to nurture that sort of deep learning.
It's the ethos of care, really.
Yeah.
We are right at the end of the hour, and we have covered a tremendous amount of ground. I just wanted to ask one more question for myself before the clock is totally run out, which is what thinking about this approach, thinking about critical pedagogy, thinking about the way they integrate so many different aspects of higher education. How do you keep this moving? How do you keep this going? I mean, it's not what you're describing is an attitude that requires time, professional development. How is this going to be supported? How is it sustainable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because at some level, institutions have to step up and start supporting it. And one of the things that we find at Digital Pedagogy Lab, for example, is that now we found some good things and there's like good news and bad news. And the good news is that we've actually seen an increase, a really dramatic increase in the number of institutions that are sending groups to Digital Pedagogy Lab, which means that those whole groups are coming back to their institutions with ideas for change. And that's been really productive for people. The sort of bad side of that is that we also still have lots of institutions that aren't even supporting people to go. And part of the problem with that is that the word pedagogy is in the title, and pedagogy is not really funded. And so, but what we've done is we've created, as much as we can, we've created access options for people to attend. which includes like really low prices and that sort of thing for people to come. We also try to do everything. I mean, I try to do everything I can to reach out to anybody who needs that. The community, again, with the grassroots piece of it, the community, the people who are here, the people who are on Twitter, that's where some of the support's going to come from. Yes, at some point, institutions have to step forward and start supporting this work. But in the meantime, there are people who will support this work. There are amazing, generous, wonderful people who will support this work, and just reach out and believe they're there and reach out and find them.
One of those people is you. Thank you so much for being so generous and kind with your hour. I know it's late at night now in Britain, so it's time to hit the pub and be social.
That's right.
Thank you so much. This has been a masterclass. This has been an advanced seminar in critical pedagogy. Thank you so much. We look forward to following up with you as this goes. Thank you again. But don't go away, friends. My pleasure. Don't go away, friends. We have to wrap this up, and we have to tell you about what's happening next. So as we've been talking about critical pedagogy and about the pedagogy of hospitality, we now get to step back, because next week is, believe it or not, our 3rd anniversary. The Future Trends Forum turns 3. So we have a lot to reflect on. So next week is going to be silly. Please show up in crazy costumes if you like. We'll be bringing back as many old friends as possible. And we'll be talking about the future and the past of where the forum can go. So that's what's on schedule for the last day of January 2019. Please come and bring your friends. Now, along the way, we will also be readying our next book. We have had very few suggestions for what book to read. So if you would like to send us a suggestion, please ping me. So what nonfiction title would be best for us to read to explore the future of education and technology? We can add it to our bookstore, where you can still get great presents for people. And in the meantime, if you want to have the conversation keep going, we're all over social media. Sean recommended looking to Twitter. We definitely have the hashtag FTTE. We have all these other social media handles. We have groups in Slack, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And if you'd like to keep up with Sean and his work, look at the bottom left of the screen. You should see those different tan-colored tags that'll take you to all these different resources. In the meantime, this has been a great conversation today. I'm just delighted to see all the wonderful ideas and questions that you come up with. Thank you so much. We'll see you online, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.